Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back 2 millennia, not into a library or a museum, but onto the dusty, sun-baked roads of ancient Judea. Imagine the air, thick with the smell of olive groves, livestock, and cooking fires. The murmur of Aramaic fills the streets, and in this world, without modern medicine, without a germ theory, without any recourse for chronic or congenital illness, a simple touch, a quiet word, or even a command spoken from miles away is reportedly erasing afflictions that have defined people their entire lives. We're going to walk right into the center of these accounts, to the moments where the impossible seemed to bend to the will of one man. Now picture yourself with a condition from that era, leprosy, for instance. Your skin is decaying, your nerve endings are dead, and you're a walking ghost, legally and socially dead to your family and community. You have no antibiotics, no treatment, no hope. Let's be brutally honest. You probably won't survive this, not with your life or your identity intact. It's a slow, agonizing erasure. It's into that level of desperation that these stories are born. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. To truly grasp the seismic shockwave that Jesus' healings sent through his world, we have to begin not with the maladies themselves, but with the walls. These were not walls of stone or brick, but invisible, unbreachable barriers constructed from the potent mortar of law, fear, and a deeply ingrained understanding of purity and defilement. In the intricate social and religious landscape of first-century Judea, to be sick was often far more than a mere medical condition. It was a spiritual verdict, a public declaration of being unclean. This single word, tameh in Hebrew, carried the crushing, inescapable weight of total social and religious exile. It was, in the most practical and terrifying sense, to be pronounced dead while your lungs still drew breath. This, therefore, is where our journey must commence. Among the socially dead, the untouchables, those forgotten souls for whom a cure was not just a return to health, but a resurrection from a tomb of isolation back into the land of the living. And there is no more potent, no more visceral example of this living death than the figure of the leper. The word we translate as leprosy from the Hebrew tsaroth and the Greek lepra presents an immediate challenge to our modern understanding. It is crucial to divest ourselves of the specific clinical image of Hansen's disease, the bacterial infection we identify as leprosy today. While Hansen's disease certainly existed in the ancient world, the biblical term was a far broader, more terrifying classification, a catch-all for a host of disfiguring and chronic skin conditions. Tsaroth could describe severe cases of psoriasis, the patchy depigmentation of vitiligo, a fungal infection like favus, or any number of dermatological ailments that resulted in flaky, raw, or decaying flesh. The critical factor was not a precise medical diagnosis, a concept that was entirely alien, but rather its visible appearance. The ancient worldview, particularly within the framework of Jewish law, operated on a foundational principle of order versus chaos, of wholeness versus brokenness. A healthy body was a complete body, its boundaries intact, its skin smooth and unbroken, a microcosm of the ordered cosmos created by God. Nazareth, then, was the terrifying visual manifestation of chaos, of decay and disorder invading the sacred temple of the human form. It was perceived as a creeping, visible death, a physical corruption that was widely believed to mirror a deep spiritual one. Later rabbinic traditions would explicitly link Nazareth to specific moral failings, most notably lashon hara, slander, or evil speech, but also to arrogance, theft, and even murder. Whether every common person subscribed to this direct cause and effect theology is debatable, but the cultural association was potent and inescapable. The disease consuming your skin was seen as an outward sign of something profoundly wrong within. The law of Moses, specifically in the highly detailed chapters of Leviticus 13 and 14, laid out the protocol for dealing with this condition with chilling, bureaucratic precision. It is essential to read these chapters not as a medical text seeking to cure, but as a legal and ritual text seeking to contain a source of profound defilement that threatened the sanctity of the entire community. The ultimate authority to diagnose Nazareth belonged not to a physician or a healer, but exclusively to a priest of the temple. The afflicted person, perhaps noticed by family or neighbors, would be brought before this religious official, who would then act as a public health inspector. The priest's examination was purely visual. He would scrutinize the sore or the patch of skin. Was the hair growing in the affected area white and brittle? Did the sore appear to be deeper than the surrounding healthy skin? Based on these and other detailed criteria, the priest would either order a 7-day quarantine for further observation, or, if the signs were definitive, deliver the verdict immediately. One can only imagine the suffocating terror of that week of waiting. A person isolated, anxiously inspecting their own flesh, praying that a simple patch of irritation doesn't deepen, that a single white hair doesn't sprout, knowing that their entire identity, their family, their future, hangs precariously on the visual judgment of another man. If the devastating verdict was unclean, the consequences were instantaneous and absolute. The law prescribed a systematic process for the leper's social execution, a ritualized transformation from person to pariah. The blueprint for this living funeral is found in Leviticus 13:45-46. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes. Let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. Let's carefully deconstruct the devastating power of these requirements. Every single element was meticulously designed to broadcast defilement and enforce an unbreakable separation. Torn clothes were a traditional sign of mourning, a funereal rite. The person was, in effect, being forced to perpetually mourn their own life, to wear the uniform of their own bereavement. Their hair, unkempt and unbound, was a symbol of chaos and disgrace, a rejection of social order and personal dignity. The requirement to cover the lower part of their face, like a veil, served a dual purpose. It was thought to prevent their contaminated breath from spreading defilement, and it simultaneously obscured their identity, rendering them faceless. But the most psychologically brutal element was the cry, "Unclean, unclean, Tame, Tame." This was not merely a warning, it was a forced confession, a verbal participation in their own ostracization. They became a human siren, compelled to announce their own pollution, to watch others recoil in fear and disgust at their approach. Their given name was erased, replaced by a single, defining, wretched word that encapsulated their entire being: unclean. And then came the final, crushing decree. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. This was not a suggestion for quarantine. It was a legal command of expulsion. They were banished from their home, their village, their tribe, their family. They could no longer practice their trade, buy or sell in the marketplace, or draw water from the community well. Crucially, they were barred from the sacred spaces that defined their identity as one of God's chosen people. They could not enter the local synagogue to pray with their community, nor could they approach the temple in Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. They could not embrace their spouse or hold their child, for their very touch transmitted their state of uncleanness. They became specters, haunting the periphery of the society that had birthed and then rejected them. Often they would form destitute colonies of fellow outcasts in caves, remote valleys, or near garbage heaps outside the city walls, subsisting on whatever charity was thrown to them from a safe distance, or by scavenging. This was not simply social distancing, as we might understand it. It was social, economic, and spiritual annihilation. The psychological toll of such an existence is almost impossible for us to fully comprehend in our modern context. Imagine being utterly and completely defined by your disease, to have every normal human relationship severed, to be viewed not as a person suffering a terrible affliction, but as a walking source of spiritual pollution, a threat to the well-being of the entire community. The profound loneliness, the soul-crushing despair, the internalized self-loathing must have been a cancer of the spirit far more corrosive than the disease that was eating away at their flesh. And hope for restoration was a flickering, almost non-existent flame. While the law in Leviticus 14 does indeed outline an incredibly elaborate, costly, and complex 8-day ritual for purification in the unlikely event that someone was healed, the very existence and intricacy of this ritual highlights its extreme rarity. The ceremony involved 2 living birds, cedarwood, scarlet yarn, hyssop, multiple sacrifices, the shaving of all body hair, and repeated ritual washings. It was so uncommon that a cleansing from leprosy was widely considered a miracle on par with raising the dead. In the entirety of the Old Testament scriptures, apart from Moses' sister Miriam, whose affliction was temporary and a direct, short-term punishment from God, the only individual recorded as being cleansed of leprosy is Naaman the Syrian, a foreigner, a military commander from an enemy nation, and his healing was an extraordinary prophetic act of God through Elisha. For an ordinary Jew in Jesus' time, a diagnosis of Tsaroth was a one-way ticket to a living grave, a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion. It is into this profound abyss of hopelessness that an unnamed man walks in the parallel narratives of Matthew 8, Mark 1, and Luke 5. He is not introduced by his name, his village, or his lineage. He is simply a leper. That is his entire identity. And on this day, he does something utterly unthinkable, an act of sheer, audacious desperation. He breaks every single rule of his exile. He walks back into the camp. He enters a populated town. He purposefully makes his way through a crowd of clean people who would have scattered in panic and outrage had they seen him in time. He is a walking, breathing violation of the law, a contamination vector on a collision course with the entire established social and religious order. He is driven by a sliver of hope so radical it borders on madness, and he makes his way directly to Jesus. Mark's account is particularly vivid and emotionally charged. The man, seeing Jesus, doesn't just call out from a distance. He approaches and falls to his knees. This is a posture of intense supplication, of worship, but it is also a posture of extreme vulnerability. He is a defiled object in a clean space, and he knows it. He is risking, at the very least, a violent beating and summary expulsion. In a more zealous crowd, he could be risking death by stoning for so brazenly threatening the purity of the community. But his life as he knew it is already over. He has nothing left to lose. And then he speaks the words that seem to hang in the air, a perfect and poignant distillation of a lifetime of rejection, wrestling with a fragile, nascent faith. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Let us pause and analyze the profound theology packed into that simple sentence. It is a declaration of incredible faith. Notice, he does not say, Lord, if you are able. He does not for a moment question Jesus' power or capacity to heal him. In his worldview, a cleansing from leprosy was a miracle that belonged to the realm of God alone. By approaching Jesus with this request, the leper is already making a staggering, implicit claim about who he believes Jesus to be. His only question, the raw, bleeding wound that has defined his miserable existence, is one of willingness. After years, perhaps decades, of people being unwilling to come near him, unwilling to speak to him, unwilling to meet his gaze, he asks the ultimate question of the divine presence standing before him. Are you, like every other human being I have encountered, repulsed by my decay? Is your holiness a fragile thing that I would contaminate? Or is it a powerful, creative force? Are you willing to engage with someone so utterly broken? It is the timeless cry of every outcast soul, the whispered prayer of every person who feels themselves to be too messy, too broken, too unclean to be wanted by God or by man. What happens next is the pivot upon which the entire purity system of the ancient world is shattered. Any other rabbi, any other priest, any other pious man would have recoiled in horror. They would have shouted for him to get back, to keep the legally prescribed distance. The Torah demanded it. Social convention demanded it. The instinct for religious self-preservation demanded it. Jesus does the exact opposite. Mark tells us that Jesus was filled with compassion. The Greek word used here in many of the best manuscripts, splanchnisomai, is one of the most visceral words in the New Testament. It does not mean simple pity or intellectual sympathy. It refers to a deep, churning feeling in the guts, in the bowels splanchna, which the ancients considered the seat of the most profound emotions, like love and mercy. It is a gut-wrenching, full-bodied, convulsive empathy. Jesus does not just see the man's condition, he feels it in the core of his being. Moved by this profound, internal upheaval, Jesus does the most scandalous, the most shocking, the most ritually contaminating thing he could possibly do. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Stop and feel the colossal weight of that moment. For the first time in years, perhaps a decade or more, this man feels intentional human contact. And it is not the accidental brush of a passerby, not a shove to get him out of the way, not a blow from a stick, but a deliberate, compassionate, affirming touch. In the meticulously ordered world of Levitical law, the flow of contamination was an inviolable, one-way street. The unclean defiled the clean. By touching the leper, Jesus should, according to the law, have become ritually unclean himself. He would have been barred from temple worship, required to undergo purification rituals, and been rendered temporarily unfit to be in the presence of God or the community of the faithful. He was knowingly and deliberately breaking the established law in a radical act of solidarity. But that is not what happens. The expected transaction of defilement is miraculously aborted. Instead of the leper's uncleanness flowing into Jesus, Jesus's perfect wholeness, his intrinsic holiness, his creative cleanness flows like a tidal wave into the leper, and in an instant, it utterly obliterates the disease. The fundamental law of spiritual physics is reversed. Jesus is not defiled by the sickness is annihilated by his sanctity. Then come the words, a direct verbal answer to the man's hesitant, soul-barring plea. I am willing, Jesus says. With those two words, he heals the deepest wound, the fear of being unwanted. Yes, I am willing. I am not repulsed. I see you, and I move toward you. And then he follows with the command of sovereign power, be clean, katharistheti. The command is not be healed, but be cleansed. It addresses not just the physical disease, but the entire state of ritual defilement. And the miracle is instantaneous. Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. The language is absolute. The creeping death was gone. The chaotic, broken skin was made whole. In a single moment, his body, his identity, his future were all returned to him. But Jesus' restorative work is not yet finished. Restoring the man's body is only the first half of the miracle. Now, he must meticulously restore the man's life within his community. He gives him two stern commands. The first is one of secrecy. See that you don't tell anyone. This is a recurring theme in Mark's Gospel, a motif often called the messianic secret. Scholars have long debated its precise meaning. Was Jesus attempting to control the narrative of his mission, to prevent his identity from being misunderstood as that of a mere wonder worker, or, more dangerously, a political revolutionary? A populous yearning to throw off the yoke of Roman occupation could easily seize upon such a powerful figure and force a confrontation he was not yet ready for. Was he trying to manage the overwhelming crush of the crowds that would hinder his ability to travel and teach? Whatever the complex reasons, he sought to put a temporary brake on the explosion of publicity this astonishing act would inevitably cause. The second command, however, is one of strict public legal observance. But go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. This is a move of profound wisdom and strategic brilliance. Jesus, having just shattered the core principle of the purity law through his compassionate touch, now insists on upholding its legal and procedural framework. Why? For several crucial reasons. First and foremost, it was the only official pathway for the man to be legally and publicly restored to his community. He needed that official declaration from the priestly authority to be truly free. The very same religious system that had pronounced him dead to society would now be legally compelled to inspect his healed body and pronounce him clean, alive, and whole. Only then could he go home. Only then could he work his trade. Only then could he embrace his wife and children. Jesus was not just interested in a physical fix. He was committed to the man's full social and religious reintegration. And the final phrase, as a testimony to them, is charged with meaning. This was not just for the man's benefit. The healed man himself, standing before the priests in Jerusalem, his skin as smooth as a child's, would be a walking, breathing testament to a power at work in Galilee that they could neither explain nor control. The prescribed offerings, the 2 birds, the lambs, the grain, the oil, would constitute the physical, undeniable evidence entered into the official records of the temple. The religious authorities, the guardians of the law, would be forced to confront the staggering fact that someone was walking their land with the divine authority to do what only God was supposed to do, to cleanse a leper. It was a direct and irrefutable challenge to their authority, delivered not through a theological debate, but through the undeniable evidence of a restored human life. Ironically, and perhaps very humanly, Mark tells us the man was so overcome with explosive joy that he ignored the command for silence and began to talk freely, spreading the news everywhere. The consequence was a dramatic reversal of social status between Jesus and the man he had healed. The leper, now cleansed, could joyfully re-enter the towns and villages, his life restored. But as Mark notes, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. He had, in a sense, taken the leper's isolation upon himself, so that the leper could be brought back into the heart of the community. It's a stunning and powerful foreshadowing of his ultimate substitutionary work, taking on the defilement of the world in order to bring humanity back into fellowship with God. This encounter, therefore, was never just a healing. It was a complete reordering of reality, a radical manifesto in flesh and blood, where divine love reached across the chasm of ritual impurity, touched death, and pulled a forgotten man back into the fullness of life. From the profound social death of the leper, we now turn our gaze to a different kind of darkness, a world lived in perpetual twilight or absolute blackness, the world of the blind. If leprosy was a disease of exclusion that forced others to keep their distance, blindness was a condition of profound dependency that stripped a person of their autonomy. In the ancient world, sight was synonymous with life, with knowledge, with safety, and with productivity. To be without it was to be plunged into an existence of vulnerability, poverty, and often theological shame. The healing of the blind, therefore, was one of the most anticipated signs of the Messianic age, a sign prophesied by Isaiah. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. When Jesus began to restore sight, he was not just performing an act of compassion. He was making a direct and audacious claim that the long-awaited age of God's redemption had arrived in his very person. To understand the sheer magnitude of these miracles, we must first immerse ourselves in the lived reality of a blind person in first-century Palestine. Economically, it was a near-total catastrophe. In a society that was overwhelmingly agrarian and based on manual labor, a blind man could not farm. He could not be a carpenter, a fisherman, or a stonemason. A blind woman could not easily weave, manage a household, or gather wood. With no social safety nets, no disability benefits, no guide dogs or braille, the options for survival were stark and humiliating. The primary and often only viable profession was begging. The blind became fixtures at the city gates, along the dusty highways, or near the temple entrances, places with high foot traffic where they might appeal to the charity and religious piety of passers-by. Their identity became synonymous with their plea for alms. They were not seen as individuals, but as a class, the blind beggars. Their lives were a cycle of dependency, of listening to the footsteps of others, of discerning from the tone of a voice whether they would receive a coin or a curse. The medical context was equally bleak. Blindness was rampant in the ancient Near East. The harsh glare of the sun, the fine dust, and poor hygiene contributed to widespread eye infections. Trachoma, a bacterial infection that scars the inner eyelid and eventually turns the eyelashes inward to scrape against the cornea with every blink, was a common and agonizing cause of blindness. Untreated cataracts would slowly turn the world into a milky haze. Malnutrition specifically a lack of vitamin A, could lead to night blindness and eventual total vision loss. And then there were the congenital conditions, those born into darkness, a mystery and a tragedy for which there was no explanation or cure. While there were rudimentary salves and potions, none were effective against serious conditions. Blindness was, for all intents and purposes, a permanent and irreversible state. But it was the theological context that added the heaviest burden. In a world that sought divine meaning in every aspect of life, the question, why, loomed large over every case of suffering. Lacking the frameworks of modern science, genetics, or microbiology, the default answer was almost always theological. Sickness was a direct consequence of sin. This belief was rooted in parts of the Hebrew Scriptures, such as the declaration in the Ten Commandments that God punishes the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. While the prophets and wisdom literature offered more nuanced views, the popular understanding was often a straightforward equation. Suffering equals sin. This meant that a blind person was not only physically afflicted and economically destitute, they were also socially and religiously stigmatized. They carried a visible mark of divine disfavor. People would look at them and wonder, what did he do to deserve this? Or even more cruelly, what did his parents do? This added a crushing layer of shame, guilt, and spiritual isolation to their already immense physical hardship. They were not just blind, they were seen as sinners, marked by God for some hidden transgression. It is precisely at this intersection of physical darkness and theological despair that we find the most detailed, dramatic, and aeologically profound healing story in all the Gospels. The account of the man born blind in the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John. This is not a simple miracle story. It is a masterfully constructed drama in 7 scenes, in which the miracle itself is just the opening act. The real story is about the explosive aftermath, a deepening conflict between light and darkness, between sight and blindness, that forces every character in the narrative, the healed man, his parents, his neighbors, and the religious authorities, to take a stand. The story opens as Jesus and his disciples are walking along. They see a man who has been blind from birth. His case represents the most extreme and inexplicable form of the condition. He didn't lose his sight through accident or infection. He was born into a world he had never seen. The disciples, products of their culture, immediately ask the theological question that is on everyone's mind. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Their question is a perfect encapsulation of the punitive worldview. They assume sin is the cause and are simply trying to assign the blame. Was it the man's own sin, somehow committed in the womb or foreseen by God? Or was it the sin of his parents, their moral failure now tragically visited upon their son? They see the man not as a person in need of compassion, but as a theological problem to be solved. Jesus' answer is a theological revolution that shatters their entire framework. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, he replies. With this single sentence, he demolishes the simplistic sin-suffering equation. He lifts the burden of guilt from this man and his family. The cause of the blindness is not found in a past moral failure. Then, he provides a new, radical lens through which to view the man's condition. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. This is a breathtaking reframing of suffering. It is not necessarily punitive. It can be propositional. It can be the dark canvas upon which God intends to paint a masterpiece of grace and power. The man's decades of darkness were not meaningless. They were the prelude to a moment of divine revelation. Jesus then connects this specific act to his universal mission, saying, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." He is about to perform a literal, physical act that will serve as a living parable for his entire identity. He will give physical light to one man as a sign that he is the spiritual light for all humanity. What follows is one of the strangest and most symbolic healing methods recorded. Jesus doesn't simply speak a word of healing. The text says, "He spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes." This act would have been bizarre and to some offensive. Spittle was considered unclean by some Jewish purity standards. The act is earthy, physical, and almost crude. Yet it is saturated with theological meaning. The use of dust or clay immediately evokes the creation story in Genesis 2, where God forms Adam from the dust of the ground and breathes life into him. Jesus, in mixing his saliva with the dust of the earth, is performing a sign of new creation. He is not just repairing a faulty set of eyes. He is recreating this man, giving him a faculty he never possessed. It's an act that demonstrates a sovereignty over the human body that belongs only to the Creator. But the miracle is not yet complete. Jesus then gives the man a command that requires an act of faith and obedience. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This was not a simple request. The man has to navigate his way through the streets of Jerusalem, a familiar yet unseen world, with a paste of mud and spittle caked on his eyes. He is a public spectacle, relying only on the word of a stranger who has just performed a strange and messy ritual on him. The pool of Siloam was a key water source for Jerusalem, located at the southern end of the city. The gospel writer John, ever the theologian, points out the symbolic meaning of the name. Siloam means sent. The man blind from birth is sent to the pool named Sent by the one who is the ultimate sent one from God the Father. The entire journey is a parable of faith. The man obeys. He makes his way to the pool, washes the mud from his eyes, and the text records the result with beautiful simplicity. He went and washed and came home seeing. Imagine that moment. Not a gradual return of vision, but an instantaneous flood of light, color, and form into a mind that had no prior categories for them. The first face he truly sees, the texture of a stone wall, the color of the sky, it would have been an overwhelming, shocking, glorious sensory explosion. He doesn't just receive sight, he receives the world. This, however, is where the real drama begins. The miracle is complete, but the conflict is just starting. The first people to react are his neighbors and those who had seen him begging. Their reaction is one of utter confusion and disbelief. The man's identity was so intertwined with his blindness that his healing creates a crisis. "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" they ask. The change is so radical they can't be sure. Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. It is the man himself who has to resolve their confusion with his simple, powerful testimony. I am the man. His first declaration with his new sight is an affirmation of his own identity. When they press him for details, how then were your eyes opened? His testimony is straightforward and factual, devoid of theological embellishment. The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. It's the simple, unassailable truth of his experience. Unsettled and perhaps suspicious, the neighbors bring him to the Pharisees. This is where the story shifts from a tale of healing to a tense courtroom drama. The Pharisees begin their interrogation, and immediately the central conflict of the chapter is revealed. John notes, now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. For the Pharisees, this fact changes everything. Their concern is not with the stupendous, life-altering miracle, but with a potential infraction of religious law. According to their oral traditions, which built a fence of detailed regulations around the Torah's command to rest on the Sabbath, the act of kneading or making the mud constituted a form of work and was therefore forbidden. The miracle, in their eyes, is tainted by the method and the timing of its performance. This immediately creates a sharp division among the religious leaders. Some, clinging to a rigid interpretation of the law, declare, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Their premise is simple. A man of God would not break God's law. Therefore, Jesus cannot be from God. But others are troubled by the evidence before them. They look at the man who was a fixture of their city, a beggar known by all to have been blind from birth, and they are forced to ask, how can a sinner perform such signs? They are caught in a logical bind. The evidence of unprecedented power clashes with their interpretation of religious propriety. They turn their interrogation back to the healed man, hoping he will provide the answer. What do you have to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. This is a pivotal moment for the man. He is no longer just a witness. He is being asked to be an interpreter. His response shows the first sign of his growing faith and insight. He doesn't just repeat the facts, he offers a conclusion. He is a prophet, he declares. In the Jewish tradition, a prophet was a man sent from God who spoke and acted with divine authority. The beggar, with his newfound sight, is beginning to see Jesus more clearly than the religious experts. Dissatisfied and suspecting a fraud, the Pharisees refused to believe that the man had been blind at all. They escalate their investigation by summoning his parents. The scene with the parents is a masterclass intention, and fear. They are caught between the undeniable truth of their son's healing and the terrifying power of the religious authorities. The Pharisees ask them 3 questions. Is this your son? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? The parents' answer is a carefully worded, legally precise statement designed for maximum self-preservation. We know he is our son, they affirm, and we know he was born blind. They confirm the 2 essential facts that establish the miracle's foundation. But when it comes to the 3rd question, the dangerous one that involves Jesus, they retreat. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age, he will speak for himself. John, the narrator, provides the crucial context for their fear. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. The threat of excommunication, to be made aposynagogues, was terrifying. It meant being cut off from the entire religious, social, and cultural life of the community. It was a social death, similar in scope to the exile of the leper. They would be shunned, unable to conduct business, and isolated from their friends and family. Faced with this threat, the parents confirm the miracle, but refuse to name the miracle worker. They throw their son back to the wolves. The Pharisees, their fraud theory debunked, summon the man for a second, more hostile interrogation. They attempt to intimidate him with religious authority. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they begin. This was a formal adjuration, a way of putting him under oath, implying that his previous testimony was a lie. We know that this man is a sinner. They are not investigating. They are declaring their verdict and demanding he conform to it. But the man is no longer the timid beggar. His encounter with Jesus, the restoration of his sight, and the interrogation process itself have forged in him a newfound confidence and a sharp wit. His response is one of the most powerful and memorable declarations in the entire Bible. He sidesteps their theological trap with brilliant simplicity. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. He abandons their abstract debate about Jesus' piety and anchors himself to the undeniable, experiential reality of his own transformation. He cuts through their legalistic fog with the clear light of his own experience. It is a perfect testimony, simple, personal, and irrefutable. He then goes on the offensive, turning their interrogation back on them with biting sarcasm. When they ask him again how Jesus did it, he replies, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" This is an astonishingly bold taunt. He, the uneducated beggar, is mocking the learned doctors of the law. He is pointing out their willful blindness, their refusal to accept the evidence they claim to be seeking. Cornered and insulted, they hurl abuse at him. "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." They retreat to their tradition and their credentials. They are disciples of the long-dead Moses. He is the disciple of this living, present, and troublesome healer. The man, now fully emboldened, delivers his closing argument, a piece of impeccable common-sense theology that exposes the bankruptcy of their position. "Now that is remarkable," he says, feigning surprise. "You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. He has trapped them in their own theological framework. He argues from effect to cause. 1. God only listens to the godly. 2. Opening the eyes of a man born blind is an unprecedented act that could only be done by someone God listens to. 3. Therefore, Jesus must be from God. The uneducated beggar has completely outreasoned the scholars. He can see the truth with a clarity they lack. Unable to refute his logic and enraged by his insolence, they resort to their final weapon, ad hominem attack and raw power. "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" they cry. They throw his former condition back in his face, using the very theology Jesus refuted at the beginning of the story. And then, the text says, they threw him out. He is excommunicated, cast out from the community for his testimony. Drama reaches its climax in the final scene. The man has gained physical sight, but has lost his religious community. He is alone, and it is here that Jesus seeks him out. Having heard that the man was expelled, Jesus finds him and asks the most important question yet. "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Jesus is inviting him to move beyond seeing him as a prophet to understanding his true messianic identity. The man's response is beautiful in its open-hearted trust. "Who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." He is ready to believe. He just needs the light of revelation to be fully switched on. Jesus' reply connects the man's physical and spiritual journey. You have now seen him, in fact. He is the one speaking with you. The first person he truly saw after washing in the pool was, in a deeper sense, the Son of Man himself. The physical sight was a prelude to this spiritual recognition. Upon hearing this, the man makes his final, ultimate declaration of faith. "Lord, I believe," and the text says, he worshipped him. His journey is complete. He has moved from congenital blindness to physical sight, to prophetic insight, and finally to worshipful faith. He can now truly see. Jesus concludes the entire episode with a somber reflection on the great irony that has just played out. "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." His presence in the world acts as a catalyst, a moment of truth that reveals the true state of people's hearts. The humble who know they are blind, like the beggar, are given sight, while the proud who claim to see, like the Pharisees, are revealed to be truly blind. The Pharisees, overhearing this, ask the self-incriminating question, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus' chilling answer confirms their condemnation. If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Their blindness is not a lack of knowledge, but a willful refusal to see the truth that is standing right in front of them. Their claim to spiritual sight is what makes them culpable. The story that began with a man who couldn't see ends with a group of leaders who refused to see. It powerfully demonstrates that the greater miracle is not the opening of physical eyes, but the opening of a believing heart, and the greater tragedy is not being born blind, but choosing to remain in the dark. Having explored the restoration of those exiled by ritual impurity and the profound gift of light to those who lived in darkness, we now arrive at a different kind of human prison, the state of immobility. We will investigate the plight of the paralytic, the individual whose body has become a cage, whose limbs refuse the commands of the will. This is a state of utter dependency, a living death of a different sort, where the world shrinks to the size of a single mat or bed. In these next accounts, we witness Jesus confronting this physical bondage, but in doing so, he makes a claim so audacious and so profound that it moves the conflict from the realm of medicine to the heart of theology. He demonstrates an authority not just over dormant muscles and unresponsive nerves, but over the spiritual condition of humanity itself. And he shows that this authority is not bound by physical presence, that his command can traverse space and distance as easily as it can command a paralyzed limb to move. First, we must step into the world of the paralytic in the 1st century. The term we translate as paralytic was a broad, non-clinical descriptor for a range of debilitating conditions. It could refer to someone who had suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury from a fall, a tragically common occurrence in a world of flat-roofed homes used for work and socializing. It could describe the aftermath of a stroke, what we would call a cerebrovascular accident, leaving one side of the body limp and useless. It could be the ravages of diseases like poliomyelitis, which could leave a person with withered, unresponsive limbs. Or it could be a case of severe, crippling arthritis or an advanced neurological disorder. Whatever the cause, the outcome was the same: a life of profound helplessness. The social and economic consequences were devastating. A paralytic was completely, utterly dependent on the care of others. They could not work. They could not feed themselves, bathe themselves, or relieve themselves without assistance. They became, through no fault of their own, a significant and perpetual burden on their families in a society where subsistence living was the norm. And every able-bodied person was needed for the family unit to survive. Their world became one of ceilings, and the faces of those who cared for them, their existence measured by the kindness and endurance of their caregivers. And like the blind, they were often relegated to the life of a beggar, laid out on a mat in a public place, a silent, immobile testament to human fragility. To this physical and economic hardship was added, as with other afflictions, a heavy theological weight. The state of being physically bound was often seen as a direct metaphor, or even a consequence, of being spiritually bound by sin. The psalmist might cry out about being stuck in a miry bog, and this language of being trapped and unable to move resonated with the physical reality of the paralytic. While not as explicitly codified as the laws around leprosy, the underlying assumption that such a catastrophic affliction must be a punishment for some grievous sin was a pervasive and poisonous part of the cultural air they breathed. Their immobility was perceived as an outward sign of an inner spiritual paralysis, a helplessness before God that was mirrored in their helpless limbs. It is with this understanding that we approach one of the most compact, dramatic, and theologically explosive stories in the Gospels: the healing of the paralytic who was lowered through the roof, an account recorded with vivid detail in Mark 2, and also present in Matthew 9 and Luke 5. The scene is set in Capernaum, the bustling fishing village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee that Jesus had adopted as his base of operations. The news of his teaching and healing has spread like wildfire, and on this day, the house where he is staying, perhaps Peter's own home, is filled to bursting. Mark's description is telling. So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door. We must imagine the scene not as a polite lecture, but as a chaotic, standing room only event. The air is hot, thick with the smell of sweat and dust. The noise a constant hum of voices as people from every social stratum press in, desperate to see and hear this captivating rabbi. The doorway, the only entrance, is a bottleneck of human bodies. Into this scene come 4 men, their faces etched with determination, carrying the dead weight of their paralyzed friend on a simple sleeping mat, a krabatos. These 4 unnamed friends are the initial heroes of the story. Their faith is not a passive, intellectual belief. It is a muscular, sweating, problem-solving force. Imagine their journey, navigating the narrow, crowded streets of Capernaum, carrying their friend, their hope fixed on reaching Jesus. When they arrive at the house, they are met with an impenetrable wall of people. The path is blocked. For most, this would have been the end of the attempt. They would have turned back, defeated, promising to try again another day. But their faith is relentless. It refuses to accept no for an answer. They look at the wall of people, and then they look up. A new, audacious plan is born. To understand their plan, we must understand the architecture of a typical first-century Galilean house. These were simple structures, often built around a central courtyard. The walls were made of packed mud and stone, and the roofs were flat. The roof was constructed of wooden beams laid across the top of the walls, covered with a layer of thatch or reeds, and then sealed with a thick layer of packed mud and clay, which was baked hard by the sun. An external staircase was a common feature, as the flat roof was a vital part of the home, used for sleeping on hot nights, for drying laundry or fish, and for socializing. The plan of the 4 friends was as brilliant as it was insane. If they couldn't get in through the door, they would come in from above. They haul their helpless friend, mat and all, up the external staircase to the roof. Then begins the most disruptive act imaginable. The Greek verb Mark uses is exorisons, which means to dig out or to gouge out. This was not a neat, surgical procedure of lifting a few tiles. This was the loud, messy, and destructive act of breaking apart a solid mud roof. With their hands, or perhaps simple tools, they begin to dig. Chunks of dried clay, straw, and a shower of fine dust begin to rain down into the crowded room below, directly onto the heads of Jesus, the people, and most notably, the scribes and Pharisees who were sitting there, observing Jesus with critical eyes. This was not a polite interruption. It was a chaotic, desperate, and faith-fueled act of vandalism. They are literally tearing a man's house apart to get their friend to Jesus. Everyone in the room would have stopped, their faces turned upward in shock and annoyance as the hole in the ceiling grew wider. And then, through this dusty, sunlit opening, a man on a mat is slowly, carefully lowered down on ropes, coming to rest on the floor directly in front of where Jesus was teaching. The entire room is held in a moment of stunned silence. What would Jesus do? Would he be angry at this rude and destructive interruption? Would he rebuke these men for their presumption? The text tells us his reaction, and it is profound. When Jesus saw their faith, notice the plural, their faith, he sees the collective, desperate, creative, and unstoppable faith of the four friends who carried, climbed, and dug. It is this faith that gets his attention, and in response to their faith, he looks at the man lying helpless on the mat before him and speaks. But the words he says are not what anyone expected. He does not say, "Be healed," or "Rise up." Instead, he looks at the man with compassion and says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." With these 5 words, the atmosphere in the room changes from one of medical curiosity to one of intense theological crisis. Jesus has completely ignored the obvious physical problem and has gone straight to what he perceives as the man's deepest need, the root condition of all human brokenness. In calling him son, he speaks with a tender authority, restoring a sense of dignity and relationship to a man who was likely defined by his helplessness. But in declaring his sins forgiven, he steps over a line that, in the minds of the religious experts present, no man had the right to cross. The scribes, the teachers of the law, who were sitting there, do not speak their objection aloud. But Mark tells us they were thinking in their hearts. Their internal monologue is one of shock and outrage. Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Let us unpack the gravity of this charge. They were, from their perspective, absolutely correct. In the Hebrew Bible, the forgiveness of sins was a divine prerogative. It was God's exclusive right. In the established religious system of Second Temple Judaism, this divine forgiveness was mediated through the priests and the intricate sacrificial system of the temple in Jerusalem. An individual would bring their prescribed offering, the priest would perform the rite, and God would grant forgiveness. For a lay preacher, a carpenter from Galilee, to bypass the entire temple system and pronounce divine forgiveness directly, on his own authority, was an act of breathtaking arrogance. It was, to them, blasphemy, the usurpation of the rights and honors that belong to God alone. What happens next is just as stunning. The scribes have said nothing, yet Jesus knows their thoughts. Mark writes, "Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts." He demonstrates a form of divine insight, an omniscience that reads their silent, internal judgment. He decides to bring the unspoken conflict out into the open. He looks at them and asks a question that is both simple and unanswerably brilliant. Which is easier, to say to this paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take your mat and walk"? It is a masterful question that exposes the heart of the issue. In one sense, saying your sins are forgiven is far easier. It is an invisible, internal, spiritual declaration. There is no way to publicly verify it. Anyone could make such a claim, but no one could prove or disprove it. On the other hand, saying "get up and walk" is, from a human perspective, infinitely harder. It is a command that requires a visible, public, instantaneous, and verifiable miracle. If the man doesn't get up, the speaker is immediately exposed as a fraud, his authority shown to be empty. Jesus has presented them with a choice between an unverifiable claim and a verifiable one. And then, before they can even begin to formulate an answer, he links the two together. He will use the verifiable, physical act as proof of his authority to perform the invisible, spiritual act. "But I want you to know," he says, his voice now filled with authority, "that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." The title Son of Man, drawn from the prophet Daniel, is Jesus' preferred term for himself, carrying connotations of both human humility and divine, eschatological authority. He is claiming to possess, right here on earth, an authority that his critics believed belonged to God in heaven alone. And to prove it, he turns his attention back to the paralytic lying on the floor. He puts his claim to the ultimate test. He looks the man in the eyes and issues a command in 3 parts. "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." The command is direct, personal, and comprehensive. Get up, a command to his atrophied muscles and dormant nerves. Take your mat, a sign of complete healing, for the object that once carried him, he now carries. Go home, a command of full restoration to his family and community. In the breathless silence of the room, the man, who had been immobile for years, feels power surge through his body. Muscles contract, nerves fire, and he stands up. He calmly bends down, rolls up the mat he was lying on, and in full view of every single person packed into that house, he walks out. The crowd, which had blocked the entrance for the 4 friends, now has to part like the Red Sea to let this man, now whole, walk through. The reaction is one of universal astonishment. Mark says, "This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, 'We have never seen anything like this.'" The people are overwhelmed by the visible miracle. They recognize it as an act of God and give praise. But the narrative leaves us to wonder if they fully grasped the greater claim that the miracle was meant to validate. That the one who could heal the body also had the authority to forgive the soul. The scribes, for their part, are left in stunned, furious silence. They came to critique a popular teacher and have instead witnessed an act that seems to validate his most blasphemous claim. The battle lines have been irrevocably drawn. The healing of the paralytic was not just an act of compassion. It was a public manifesto of Jesus' divine authority. This theme of authority is explored from a completely different angle in the astonishing account of the healing of the centurion's servant, found in Matthew 8 and Luke 7. Here, the challenge is not about the nature of Jesus' authority, but about its reach. It is a story that defies not just paralysis, but the very laws of physics, demonstrating a power that is not constrained by geography or the need for physical contact. And it features a faith so profound that it leaves Jesus himself amazed. The central figure is a Roman centurion. We must understand what this meant to the original audience. A centurion was a commander of a century, a unit of approximately 80 to 100 legionaries in the Roman army. He was a career soldier, a non-commissioned officer who had risen through the ranks. He was a man of discipline, of power, and most importantly, he was a living symbol of the oppressive Roman occupation of Israel. He was a Gentile, an outsider, a representative of the pagan empire that had subjugated God's chosen people. By all rights, he should be the antagonist of the story. Yet the narrative presents him as a remarkable and sympathetic character. Luke's account, which is slightly more detailed, tells us he was stationed in Capernaum, and that the Jewish elders of the town held him in high regard. They tell Jesus, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." This is a stunning piece of information. This Roman commander was not only benevolent towards the Jewish people he governed, but he was likely what was known as a God-fearer, a Gentile who was drawn to the monotheism and ethics of Judaism, worshiping the God of Israel without becoming a full convert. The situation is dire. His servant, or in Luke's Greek, his doulos, his slave, was gravely ill, paralyzed, suffering terribly, and near the point of death. The text emphasizes that the centurion valued this servant highly, a detail that speaks to his humane character in an era where slaves were often considered mere property. Driven by compassion for his servant, the centurion seeks out Jesus' help. In Matthew's more compressed account, he comes directly to Jesus. In Luke's version, which perhaps better reflects the social protocols of the time, he first sends the Jewish elders as intermediaries to plead his case, a sign of his humility and his awareness of his status as an outsider. Jesus agrees without hesitation. "I will go and heal him." He is willing to cross the significant social and religious barrier of entering a Gentile's home, an act that would render a devout Jew ritually unclean. But as Jesus is on his way, the centurion performs a second act of extraordinary humility. He sends another delegation of friends in Luke, or speaks himself in Matthew, with a message that stops Jesus in his tracks. "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof." This is an incredible statement from a man who held significant social and military power. He understood that for a Jewish holy man to enter the home of a Roman soldier was a major transgression of purity laws. His statement is one of profound respect for Jesus' holiness and Jewish tradition. But it is more than just cultural sensitivity. It is a deep, personal confession of his own unworthiness in the presence of someone he perceived to be immeasurably greater. He is saying, "You are holy, and my domain is profane. I am not worthy of your physical presence." What he says next is what elevates this story into a paradigm of faith. He explains why Jesus doesn't need to come to his house, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. He then provides the rationale for this incredible belief, drawing an analogy from his own professional life. "For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." This is a moment of breathtaking insight. The centurion, as a military man, lives and breathes the principle of authority, the potestas of the chain of command. He understands that power is not about personal effort, but about one's position within a hierarchy. His own authority over his soldiers was not inherent to him as a person. It was delegated to him by Rome. His word carried the full weight of the emperor. When he gave an order, it was obeyed without question because of the authority he represented. He looks at Jesus and recognizes, with stunning clarity, a far greater cosmic chain of command. He intuits that Jesus is a man operating under the direct authority of God himself. He sees Jesus not as a magician who needs incantations and physical props, or as a physician who needs to examine the patient, but as a cosmic commander. In his mind, sickness, paralysis, and even death are like junior soldiers or servants who are subordinate to Jesus' ultimate authority. Therefore, Jesus' physical presence is completely unnecessary. All that is required is a command. A word spoken from the commander is sufficient. He is applying a military understanding of delegated power to the spiritual and physical realms. And in doing so, he demonstrates a more profound understanding of the nature of Jesus' power than anyone Jesus had yet encountered. The effect of this speech on Jesus is profound. This is one of the very few times in the Gospels that Jesus is described as amazed or marveling. The Greek is ethamason. The faith of this Roman soldier, this Gentile occupier, stuns him. He turns to the crowd following him and makes a public declaration. "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." This would have been a shocking, even offensive, statement to his Jewish listeners. Jesus is holding up a representative of their pagan oppressors as the supreme example of faith, a faith greater than any he had found among the covenant people of Israel. He then uses this moment to deliver a radical and prophetic teaching about the nature of the kingdom of God. "I say to you that many will come from the east and the west," he says, referring to the Gentiles from all corners of the earth, "and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness. He is announcing a great reversal. The kingdom is not an exclusive inheritance based on ethnicity or lineage, but an inclusive banquet where the sole criterion for entry is the kind of faith this Roman centurion has just displayed. Finally, Jesus turns his attention back to the centurion's request. He honors the man's profound understanding of his authority. He doesn't go to the house. He simply speaks the word the centurion knew was sufficient. Go, let it be done just as you believed it would be. Matthew's account concludes with stark simplicity. And his servant was healed at that very moment. The healing was instantaneous and complete, accomplished from a distance by a mere word of command, perfectly validating the centurion's faith. Luke adds the detail that when the centurion's friends returned to the house, they found the servant completely well. When we place these two healings side by side, we see a composite picture of an authority that is absolute and multifaceted. The healing of the paralytic, lowered through the roof, demonstrates an authority that operates vertically, penetrating the spiritual realm to forgive sins, with the healing of the physical body serving as the irrefutable, earthly proof. The healing of the centurion's servant demonstrates an authority that operates horizontally, projecting power across physical space, unhindered by distance, to command healing from afar. Both stories feature a faith that is commended by Jesus, yet they are very different. One is the faith of friends, a faith that is physically persistent, willing to tear down obstacles. The other is the faith of a foreigner, a faith that is intellectually and spiritually perceptive, understanding the very nature of command. Both miracles were also profound challenges to the established power structures of the day. The first challenged the religious authority of the scribes and the temple's exclusive role in mediating divine forgiveness. The second shattered the ethnic and social boundaries of the day, showing that the power of God and the faith to receive it were not the exclusive property of Israel. These healings, therefore, defy explanation, not simply because they mended paralyzed bodies or transcended the laws of space, but because they revealed an authority that could unbind both the sins of a human soul and the physical limitations of the material world. We have walked with Jesus as he restored the socially dead to their communities, as he brought light to the world of the blind, and as he commanded paralyzed limbs and the very fabric of space to obey his will. We have witnessed an authority that challenges religious law, social convention, and physical limitation. But now we arrive at the final frontier, the ultimate boundary that defines the limits of human existence. We come face to face with the one enemy that has never lost a battle, the great and final silence that awaits every living thing. We come to the edge of the tomb. In this part of our journey, we will confront the most staggering, the most reality-bending, and the most audacious of all the miracles reported in the Gospels. The moments when Jesus stood before the cold, undeniable finality of death and commanded it to retreat. understand the earth-shattering impact of these events, we must first attempt to feel the weight of death in the ancient world. In an age without modern medicine, sanitation, or an understanding of microbiology, death was a constant and intimate companion. Life was fragile and precarious. A simple infection from a cut could be a death sentence. Fevers swept through villages, claiming the young and the old. Childbirth was perilous for both mother and infant. The infant mortality rate was staggeringly high. Life expectancy was short. Death was not a distant concept, sanitized and hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes. It was a frequent, visible, and visceral part of family and community life. It was seen as the ultimate, irreversible tragedy, the definitive end of relationship, of potential, of presence. It was the one power before which all humanity was helpless. The Jewish understanding of the afterlife at this point in history was varied and evolving, but it was generally somber. The dominant concept in much of the Hebrew Bible was that of Sheol. Sheol was not a place of fiery torment like the Greek Hades or the later Christian concept of hell. Rather, it was a shadowy, gray underworld, a land of forgetfulness, and a pit of silence. It was a place of weak, powerless existence, a realm of shades, and dust where the dead were cut off from the vibrant life of the world above, and most tragically, from the presence of the living God. The psalmist laments, "Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do those who are dead rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction?" The implied answer was a sorrowful no. Sheol was the great diminishment, the inevitable fading into nothingness. By the time of Jesus, however, this belief had developed. Influenced by periods of intense persecution and a deepening reflection on God's justice, a new hope had emerged, particularly among the Pharisees and the common people. This was the belief in a future, eschatological resurrection at the end of days. The prophet Daniel had spoken of a time when multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. This would be a great collective event, a final act of God's power to inaugurate the world to come, where the righteous would be raised to a new, glorified, and eternal existence. This was the hope that sustained the faithful. It is absolutely crucial to understand that what Jesus does in the Gospels is not this final resurrection. The people he brings back from the dead, Jairus' daughter, the widow's son, Lazarus, are not raised to a new, immortal form of life. They are resuscitated. They are brought back to the same mortal, physical life they had before. They would grow older, they would get sick again, and one day they would die again. These miracles, therefore, are something different. They are not the final act of resurrection, but they are powerful, tangible signs pointing to the one who has the authority to perform it. They are living parables, dramatic foretastes of the end-time hope, demonstrating in the here and now that the power of the age to come was already breaking into the present through the person of Jesus. He was showing his disciples and the world that he had sovereignty over the very enemy they thought was absolute. When death occurred, The mourning rituals were immediate and intense. The hot climate of the Near East necessitated burial as quickly as possible, often on the same day. The moment of death triggered a prescribed and public outpouring of grief. The immediate family would perform Kyria, the tearing of their garments, as a physical expression of their torn hearts. And very quickly, the home of the deceased would fill with the sounds of ritualized lament. It was common practice to hire professional mourners, flute players whose high, mournful notes filled the air, and wailing women who would chant dirges, beat their chests, and cry aloud, leading the community in its expression of sorrow. This was not seen as insincere. It was a vital social function, allowing the community to bear the burden of grief together. It is into this world of profound loss and ritualized despair that Jesus walks, not once, but on 3 distinct and progressively more dramatic occasions. Our first encounter takes place within a story we have already visited, the raising of the daughter of Jairus, recorded in Mark 5 and its parallel accounts. This story is intricately woven around the healing of the woman with the issue of blood, and we must now experience it from the perspective of the desperate father. Jairus is not an outcast or a beggar. He is a synagogue leader, a respected official, a man of significant standing in his community. Yet when he approaches Jesus, he abandons all pretense of status. He falls at Jesus' feet, a profound act of public humility and desperation. His plea is heart-wrenching. His 12-year-old daughter, his only daughter in Luke's account, is at the very point of death. He begs Jesus to come, lay his hands on her, and heal her. Jesus agrees and they set off, but the journey is agonizingly slow. A great crowd throngs them, pressing in from all sides. And then comes the interruption. The woman, bleeding for 12 years, secretly touches Jesus' cloak. Jesus stops. He wants to know who touched him. A conversation ensues. A confession is made. A healing is pronounced. From Jairus' perspective, this delay must have been excruciating. Every single moment Jesus spends with this anonymous woman is a moment his daughter does not have. One can only imagine his frantic, internal monologue, urging Jesus to hurry, his hope dwindling with each passing second. And then his worst fear is realized. While Jesus is still speaking to the woman, messengers arrive from Jairus' house. Their faces are grim. Their words are a death knell to his hope. Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? It is over. The final, irreversible line has been crossed. The words are meant to be a kindness, to spare Jesus a wasted journey, and Jairus any further false hope. The time for healing is past. The time for mourning has begun. But Jesus, the text says, overhearing or ignoring what they said, turns to the shattered father. He speaks a command that seems to defy all reason and reality. Don't be afraid, just believe. In the face of the undeniable fact of death, Jesus commands an allegiance to a different reality, a reality defined not by what can be seen and heard, but by his own presence and power. He is asking Jairus to trust him over the finality of death itself. He then takes control of the situation. He dismisses the crowd, allowing no one to follow him except his inner circle: Peter, James, and John, and the grieving father. When they arrive at the house, they are met with a scene of ritual chaos. The professional mourners are already at work. The house is filled with the cacophony of wailing and the shrill notes of the funeral flutes. This is the public announcement that death has conquered this home. Jesus walks into this scene of performed grief and makes a statement that is utterly confounding to those present. "Why all this commotion and wailing?" he asks. "The child is not dead, but asleep." This statement is met with scornful laughter. These are professionals. They know the difference between sleep and death. They see a grieving family. They know the child's body is cold. To them, Jesus' words are the naive ramblings of someone who doesn't understand the grim reality of the situation. But Jesus is not speaking from a human perspective. He is redefining death from a divine vantage point. For him, death is not a final state, but a temporary one, a sleep from which he has the power to awaken. Having no patience for their cynicism, he puts them all out of the house. He transforms the public spectacle of mourning into a quiet, sacred, and intimate moment. He takes only the child's father and mother and his 3 disciples and goes into the room where the child was lying. The air is now still. He approaches the bed. The 12-year-old girl is lying there, lifeless. He does something that, once again, violates the purity laws. He reaches out and takes the dead child by the hand. To touch a corpse was to incur major ritual uncleanness. But as with the leper, Jesus' touch does not transmit defilement, it transmits life. Holding her hand, he speaks. And Mark's gospel, in a detail that lends the story a powerful ring of authenticity, preserves the original Aramaic words he used. Talitha cum. The phrase is one of striking tenderness and sovereign authority. Talitha is a diminutive, an affectionate term like little lamb or my dear. Cum is a command. Arise. He is not pleading with a distant God. He is not performing a magical incantation. He is speaking directly to the dead girl with the gentle authority of a father waking his child in the morning. Little girl, I say to you, get up. The response is instantaneous and complete. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. The effect on the parents is overwhelming. The text says they were completely astonished, a weak translation for a Greek phrase that means to be ecstatic, to be driven out of one's mind with amazement. Their daughter, who was dead moments before, is now alive and walking. Jesus' final command in the story is one of beautiful, grounding practicality. He first instructs them to tell no one, and attempt to manage the publicity of such an event. And then, seeing the astonished parents and the girl now alive and well, he tells them to give her something to eat. In the midst of this stunning display of divine power, he is concerned with a little girl's hunger. This simple, mundane instruction is a profound statement. It grounds the spectacular miracle in the ordinary reality of human need. He has not just restarted her heart. He has restored her fully to to the processes of life, to her family, to her future. The second raising is a clear escalation in drama and public significance. It is found only in the Gospel of Luke, in the 7th chapter. Jairus' daughter had just died. She was in the privacy of her own home, in her own bed. The miracle was performed behind closed doors. In this next account, Jesus confronts death in a much more public and advanced state. The deceased is a young man. He has been dead long enough for a funeral procession to be arranged, and he is in his coffin, on his way to be buried. And the miracle is not solicited. It is a spontaneous act of divine compassion. Jesus and his disciples are approaching a small town called Nain. As they near the city gate, a place of public passage, they encounter another crowd coming out, a funeral procession. The two processions, one following the Lord of Life, the other accompanying a victim of death, meet in a moment of poignant drama. Luke focuses our attention on the chief mourner. The dead man was a young man, but the tragedy is compounded by the fact that his mother was a widow. We must pause and absorb the utter devastation of this woman's situation. In that patriarchal society, a woman's identity and security were tied to the men in her life, first her father, then her husband. This woman had already lost her husband, her primary source of economic support, protection, and social standing. Her only hope for the future, her social security, the one who would care for her in her old age and carry on the family name, was her only son. And now he is dead. She is not just grieving, she is destitute. She is now utterly alone, facing a future of poverty and vulnerability. The large crowd from the town, that is with her signals the community's recognition of her tragic plight, but their sympathy cannot change her reality. The text tells us that this is a miracle motivated by pure compassion. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her. The Greek verb Luke uses is the intensely visceral esplanchness, the same gut-wrenching empathy Jesus felt for the leper. He is moved from the depths of his being by the sight of this woman's total desolation. He doesn't wait to be asked. He takes the initiative. He steps toward the weeping mother and speaks words that, on their face, are almost cruel in their impossibility. Don't cry. It is a command to stop the one thing her broken heart is compelled to do. But it is not a rebuke. It is a promise. It is the prelude to him removing the cause of her tears forever. He then walks directly toward the open bier, the litter on which the young man's body, wrapped in grave clothes, was being carried. And he does something shocking. He went up and touched the bier. As with Jairus' daughter, this was a flagrant violation of the Levitical purity laws. To touch a coffin, a vessel containing a corpse, was a major source of defilement. The pallbearers, stunned by this rabbi's brazen act, immediately halt. The entire procession, the wailing, the flutes, the shuffling feet, all come to a dead stop. All eyes are on Jesus. He does not speak to the mother or to the crowd. He speaks directly to the body on the bier. His voice cuts through the silence with divine authority. Young man, I say to you, get up. The command is direct personal, and absolute. It is the voice of the Creator speaking to his creation, the voice of life speaking into the domain of death. And death obeys. The dead man sat up and began to talk. This is not a subtle sign. It is a public, undeniable, and terrifying proof of life. The man who was a silent corpse moments before is now sitting up and speaking. Luke then adds a phrase of incredible tenderness. Jesus gave him back to his mother. The miracle is not complete until the broken relationship is restored. He doesn't just give the young man his life back. He gives a son back to his mother, restoring her future, her hope, and her family. The reaction of the crowd is a mixture of fear and awe. They were all filled with fear, Luke writes, and praised God. This was not just a healing. This was a brush with the raw, terrifying power of the holy. They recognize that they are in the presence of something beyond human comprehension. Their interpretation is twofold. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. They are thinking of the great prophets of old, Elijah and Elisha, who had also raised the dead. But their second conclusion goes even further. God has come to help his people. The Greek word for to help is episkeptomai, which means to visit or to look upon. They believe God himself has visited his people on this day. The news of this public, unsolicited raising of a man from his coffin spreads like a shockwave through the entire region, cementing Jesus' reputation as a figure of unprecedented divine power. This brings us to the third and final raising, the grand climax of Jesus' signs in the Gospel of John, and the single most dramatic miracle of his public ministry, the raising of Lazarus. This story in John 11 is an escalation in every conceivable way. The person who dies is not a stranger or the child of an acquaintance, but a beloved, personal friend. He has not been dead for a few minutes or a few hours, but for 4 days, long enough for his body to begin to decay. The miracle is not a response to a desperate plea or a spontaneous act of compassion, but a deliberately staged event designed to reveal Jesus' ultimate identity. And its aftermath will be the direct catalyst for the plot to kill Jesus. John introduces us to the family of Bethany, Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus by emphasizing Jesus' deep and personal love for them. So when the sisters send a message to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick," the expectation is that he will drop everything and rush to his friend's side. But Jesus' response is puzzling, and on the surface, cruelly passive. Upon hearing the news, he proclaims, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." And then, the text says, he stayed where he was 2 more days. This deliberate delay is the theological key to the entire story. It is an act of excruciating, intentional love. Jesus is allowing the situation to move beyond all human hope. He is waiting for Lazarus not just to be sick or even to die, but to be dead, buried, and decomposing. He is staging a confrontation with death in its most absolute and irreversible form, so that the subsequent miracle will be so undeniable, so powerful, that it will serve as his final, climactic sign before his own passion. He explains this to his disciples after he finally announces, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." He is using the death of his beloved friend as the ultimate teaching moment, the ultimate test of faith. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany, Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. The official 7-day period of deep mourning, or Shiva, is underway. The house is full of mourners from Jerusalem who have come to comfort the sisters. The first encounter is with Martha. She is practical, forthright, and full of a faith that is wrestling with her grief. She runs out to meet Jesus, and her words are a mixture of poignant regret and enduring hope. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It is a statement of her profound faith in his healing power, tinged with the pain of his absence. But she doesn't stop there. "But I know," she adds, "that even now God will give you whatever you ask." She still believes in his unique access to God, even in the face of the tomb. This expression of faith prompts Jesus to make the most monumental of his 7 "I am" statements in John's Gospel. He tells her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha, a good student of Pharisaic theology, agrees, but places the event in the distant future. "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." She understands the collective, eschatological hope. But Jesus brings that future hope crashing into the present moment. "I am the resurrection and the life," he declares. "The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." This is the theological heart of the entire chapter, and perhaps the whole gospel. Jesus is not just a teacher who points the way to a future resurrection. He claims to be the very embodiment, the source, the power of resurrection and life itself. He is claiming that a relationship with him fundamentally redefines one's relationship with death. He then turns this cosmic declaration into a deeply personal question. Do you believe this? Martha's confession is one of the great affirmations of faith in Scripture. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." The next scene is with Mary. Her grief is rawer, more visceral. She doesn't engage in theological dialogue. She simply falls at Jesus' feet, weeping, and repeats the same heartbreaking refrain as her sister. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." The sight of her unrestrained grief and the weeping of the crowd of mourners who came with her has a profound and disturbing effect on Jesus. The text says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. The Greek here suggests an agitation, even an anger. And then comes the shortest verse in the English Bible, yet one of the most profound. Jesus wept. Why does he weep? He knows he is about to raise Lazarus. His tears are not tears of hopeless despair. Perhaps he weeps in deep, human sympathy for the pain of his beloved friends. Perhaps he weeps for Lazarus himself, for the ordeal of death he had to endure. Or perhaps his tears are something more profound. Perhaps he is weeping at the sheer brokenness of a world held captive by death, weeping at the pain and sorrow that his great enemy, death, inflicts upon the creation he loves. He is not a detached, emotionless deity. He is the incarnate God who enters fully into the depths of human grief and is angered by the power of the tomb. He proceeds to the tomb, a cave with a large stone rolled across its entrance. He issues a command, "Take away the stone." And it is Martha, the practical one, who voices the horrifying human reality of the situation. "But Lord," she protests, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Her objection is grim but vital. It serves to underscore the utter finality and physical reality of Lazarus's death. In the popular belief of the time, the soul was thought to hover near the body for 3 days. By the 4th day, the face had become unrecognizable. Physical decay, putrefaction had begun, and all hope was absolutely and completely gone. Martha is confirming, for the record, the human impossibility of what Jesus is about to do. Jesus gently reminds her of his promise. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" The stone is rolled away. Jesus looks up to heaven and prays aloud, not because he needs to, but for the benefit of the crowd, so they will know that his power comes from the Father. And then he turns to the dark opening of the tomb and cries out in a voice of stunning cosmic power, "Lazarus, come out. Lazaros, duro exo." It is a command that penetrates the veil between life and death, that pierces the depths of Sheol itself and summons a man back from the dust. And from the darkness of the tomb, a figure emerges. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. It must have been a terrifying, awe-inspiring, unbelievable sight. A man, 4 days dead, now standing before them, still bound in the garments of the grave. Jesus' final command is to the stunned onlookers, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." He invites the community to participate in the final act of liberation, to unbind their friend from the symbols of death and welcome him back into the world of the living. The aftermath of this undeniable public miracle is a schism. John tells us that many of the Jews who had witnessed it put their faith in Jesus, but others, terrified by the implications of his power, go straight to the Pharisees and report what had happened. This act becomes the final straw for the religious authorities. The Sanhedrin convenes an emergency session. They do not dispute the miracle. In fact, they acknowledge it. What are we accomplishing? Here is this man performing many signs. Their fear is political. If Jesus' popularity continues to grow, it could attract the attention of Rome and lead to a violent crackdown. It is here that the high priest Caiaphas makes his infamous, cynical, and unwittingly prophetic statement. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." And John adds the commentary that from that day on, they plotted to take his life. The great irony is inescapable. Jesus' supreme sign of life, the raising of Lazarus from the tomb, becomes the direct cause of the official conspiracy that will lead to his own death and his own tomb. The one who has demonstrated absolute power over death now sets his face toward Jerusalem to suffer it himself. The three raisings, taken together, form an escalating revelation of his identity. From the private room of a little girl, to the public street for a young man, to the decaying corpse of a dear friend, Jesus shows a power that is superior to death in every state. These miracles were not just resuscitations, they were living parables, signs pointing to his ultimate identity as the resurrection and the life. They were a declaration of war on the last enemy, and in the raising of Lazarus, the giver of life sealed his own death warrant, setting the stage for the one resurrection that would not be a temporary return to mortal life, but an eternal victory over the grave itself. We have journeyed through realms of profound human suffering, witnessing a power that restores, mends, and even resurrects. We have seen it defy the laws of biology, sociology, and even physics. Now, in this final part, we venture into the most mysterious, and for the modern mind, perhaps the most unsettling territory of all. We cross the threshold from the afflictions of the body to the afflictions of the mind and spirit. We enter the chaotic, terrifying world of those believed to be in the grip of unseen, malevolent forces. We will investigate the accounts of demonic possession, encounters that the gospel writers portray not as mere sickness, but as skirmishes in a cosmic war for the very soul of humanity. These are stories of minds liberated, of identities restored, of a sovereign authority confronting the very source of chaos and evil. To begin, we must make a conscious effort to shed our 21st century worldview and immerse ourselves in the mental landscape of the first century Near East. For the people of Jesus' time, the world was not a neatly ordered material machine governed by impersonal scientific laws. Instead, it was a dynamic and enchanted place, a multi-layered reality where the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms was thin and porous. Angels, spirits, demons, and divine beings were not abstract concepts. They were believed to be active and powerful agents who constantly intervened in human affairs, influencing health, sanity, the weather, and the fate of nations. What we might attribute to a virus, a genetic anomaly, or a neurological disorder, they would often attribute to the direct influence of a spiritual entity, either benevolent or, more often, malevolent. Within Second Temple Judaism, the concept of demons, or unclean spirits, was well developed. These were not the red-skinned, horned devils of medieval art. They were generally understood to be disembodied, malevolent spirits that wandered the earth, seeking to inhabit and torment human beings. Their origins were a matter of speculation, but influential, non-canonical texts like the Book of Enoch, a work widely read and respected in the period, suggested they were the restless, wicked spirits of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of fallen angels and human women mentioned in Genesis 6. These spirits were seen as the agents of chaos, sickness, and spiritual darkness. They were fundamentally opposed to God's order and God's creation, and their primary goal was to defile dehumanize, and destroy. It is crucial from our modern vantage point to acknowledge that many of the conditions described in the Gospels as demonic possession bear a striking resemblance to ailments we would now diagnose in psychological or neurological terms. The sudden convulsions, the foaming at the mouth, the falling into fire are all classic symptoms of epilepsy. The social withdrawal, the incoherent speech, the belief in being controlled by outside forces can be features of schizophrenia. The uncontrollable outbursts and superhuman strength could be related to certain forms of psychosis or mania. The modern medical model provides a powerful and important framework for understanding these phenomena. However, to simply dismiss these accounts as pre-scientific misdiagnoses is to miss the profound theological claim the gospel writers are making. They are not writing medical textbooks, they are writing theological narratives. Within their framework, these encounters are not case studies in pathology, but moments of cosmic conflict. They present Jesus not as a physician treating a brain disorder, but as a divine warrior liberating a captive soul. The symptoms of possession recorded in the Gospels consistently follow a pattern that marks them as something more than just illness in the eyes of the narrators. The afflicted often exhibit superhuman strength, breaking chains and fetters. They are driven to self-harm and social isolation, often living in desolate places like tombs, the domain of death and uncleanness. They frequently speak with a voice that is not their own, and most significantly, they possess a supernatural, preternatural knowledge of Jesus' true identity, often recognizing him as the Son of God or the Holy One of God long before his own disciples fully grasp it. For the gospel writers, this is the definitive sign that they are dealing with an intelligence that is not human. The most detailed, dramatic, and terrifying of these encounters is the story of the Gerasene demoniac, recorded with slight variations in Mark 5, Matthew 8, and Luke 8. It is a masterpiece of narrative horror and a profound demonstration of Jesus' absolute authority. The story begins with a significant geographical move. Jesus and his disciples take a boat and cross to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Gerasenes. This detail is crucial. This was the area known as the Decapolis, a league of 10 Hellenistic cities. It was predominantly Gentile, pagan territory. For the Jewish disciples, it was a foreign, ritually unclean land. This is immediately symbolized by the first thing they encounter in the full narrative: a massive herd of pigs, animals explicitly forbidden as unclean in Jewish law. Jesus is deliberately taking his ministry, his invading force of the kingdom of God, into the heart of what his culture would have considered enemy territory, the symbolic home of paganism and demonic influence. The moment Jesus steps out of the boat, the confrontation begins. He is met not by a welcoming party, but by a man possessed by an unclean spirit. The description of this man is a portrait of humanity utterly undone, a being stripped of everything that makes him human. He does not live in a house, but among the tombs. He has made his home in the domain of the dead, a place of ultimate uncleanness. He wears no clothes, a sign of his complete loss of dignity and social standing. He is in a state of constant, tormented frenzy, crying out night and day among the tombs and in the hills. He is driven to acts of horrific self-harm, repeatedly cutting himself with stones, and he possesses a terrifying, supernatural strength. The townspeople had tried to restrain him, to chain him and bind him with irons, but he had snapped the chains and shattered the fetters. No one was strong enough to subdue him. He is the very embodiment of chaos, suffering, and raw, untamable power. A man so lost to his affliction that he has become a terror to others and a torment to himself, completely severed from all human community. What happens next is stunning. This creature of wild, uncontrollable chaos, upon seeing Jesus from a distance, runs to him and falls on his knees in a posture of submission. And then the entity within the man speaks, or rather shrieks. The words reveal the central paradox of the demonic in the Gospels. They are powerful and malevolent, yet in the presence of Jesus, they are filled with terror and an absolute certainty of his identity and their own impending doom. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The spirit cries out. "In God's name, don't torture me." This is not a request from the man. It is a plea from the occupying spirit. It recognizes Jesus with a title of supreme honor, Son of the Most High God, that no human in Mark's Gospel has yet used. It knows that it stands before a superior authority, and its only thought is to beg for mercy, anticipating a torture or judgment that it knows Jesus has the power to inflict. Jesus' response is a simple, authoritative command. "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." He then asks a question that is a common feature in ancient exorcism rites. "What is your name?" In many ancient traditions, to know the name of a spiritual entity was to gain a measure of power over it. Jesus is not asking for information. He is asserting his dominance. The answer that comes back from the man's throat is one of the most chilling lines in the Gospels. "My name is Legion, for we are many." A Roman legion was the primary unit of the Roman army, a disciplined, terrifying force of up to 6,000 heavily armed soldiers. The name Legion instantly evokes images of an invading army, of overwhelming numbers, of brutal occupation and colonization. This one word reveals the horrifying scale of the man's affliction. He is not just possessed by a single entity. His entire consciousness, his very identity, has been overrun and occupied by a vast, organized host of malevolent spirits. The eye of the man has been completely submerged by the we of the demonic army that holds him captive. He is a walking territory occupied by the enemy. What follows is a bizarre negotiation. Legion begs Jesus profusely not to send them out of the country, out of their familiar Gentile territory. They see a large herd of pigs, around 2,000 of them, feeding on a nearby hillside. They make a request: "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." Why pigs? perhaps because they are unclean animals, a fitting host for unclean spirits. Perhaps it is a desperate attempt to cling to some form of physical existence rather than being cast into the abyss they so fear. Or perhaps it is one last, spiteful act of malice, a desire to cause as much destruction as possible before they are defeated. Jesus gives them permission. The text describes how the impure spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. The entire herd, possessed by this chaotic force, goes mad. It rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. This act, as bizarre as it seems, serves a crucial narrative purpose. It is the visible, tangible, and undeniable evidence that the exorcism was real. The unseen, spiritual forces have been expelled from the man, and their reality and destructive nature are now demonstrated in the physical world through the death of 2,000 animals. It is a sign of both the immense power of the spirits and the even greater authority of the one who could command them. The aftermath of this event is just as revealing as the exorcism itself. The men tending the pigs, terrified by what they have witnessed, flee to the nearby town and countryside, telling everyone what had happened. The townspeople come out in a great crowd to see for themselves, and what they see is a sight that is even more shocking than a drowned herd of pigs. They see the man who had been the local monster, the untamable madman of the tombs, and the contrast with his former state is absolute. He is sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. The three descriptors are a perfect picture of total restoration. He is sitting, no longer in a state of restless frenzy, but at peace. He is dressed, his dignity and humanity restored. He is in his right mind, his true identity rescued from the occupying legion. He has been brought back from the living death of the tombs into the community of the sane and the whole. One would expect the townspeople to rejoice, to celebrate this man's miraculous liberation. But their reaction is the opposite. The text says, they were afraid. They look at the restored man, they look at the financial loss of their pigs, and they look at Jesus, the source of this awesome, disruptive power, and they are filled not with gratitude, but with terror. This power is too great, too unpredictable, too costly for them. It has overturned their familiar reality, and so they make a request born of fear. They begin to plead with Jesus to leave their region. They would rather have their familiar madman in the tombs and their profitable herd of pigs than the unsettling, world-altering presence of the Son of the Most High God. They choose their economic and social stability over the liberating power of the kingdom. The final scene is one of poignant beauty. As Jesus is getting back into the boat to leave, the man who had been healed begs to go with him. It is a natural desire. He wants to stay with his liberator, the only one who has ever shown him mercy and power. But Jesus gives him a different mission. Go home to your own people, Jesus commands, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. The man who was once a terrifying outcast, driven from all human contact, is now commissioned to be the first apostle to the Gentiles in Mark's Gospel. His testimony will not be a theological argument, but the simple story of his own transformation. The man obeys, and as he travels throughout the Decapolis, telling his story, everyone was amazed. His restored life becomes the living proof of the power that had visited their shores. This dramatic account in the land of the Gerasenes serves as the archetypal exorcism story. But the theme of Jesus' absolute authority over unclean spirits is a constant thread woven throughout his ministry. In fact, the very first miracle recorded in Mark's Gospel is an exorcism. It takes place on the Sabbath in the synagogue in Capernaum, the very center of religious life. As Jesus is teaching, a man with an unclean spirit cries out. Once again, the spirit displays supernatural knowledge. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. It recognizes Jesus' divine identity with perfect clarity. Jesus' response is sharp and immediate. He rebukes the spirit with a word used for muzzling an animal, Finality, which translates as be quiet or be muzzled. He will not allow his identity to be proclaimed by a demonic source. He then commands, "Come out of him." The spirit throws the man into a violent convulsion, shrieks, and comes out. The man is left unharmed. The reaction of the congregation defines the theme of Jesus' early ministry. They are all amazed, asking, "What is this?" A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him. From the very beginning, his authority, exousia, is shown to be a power that commands not just human attention, but the obedience of the spiritual realm. This authority is not limited by geography, ethnicity, or even physical presence. In the story of the Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile from the region of Tyre and Sidon, we see an exorcism performed from a distance. This desperate mother, whose daughter is possessed by a demon, comes to Jesus and engages him in a famous, challenging dialogue. Her persistent, witty, and humble faith, arguing that even the dogs deserve the crumbs that fall from the master's table, breaks through the social and ethnic barriers of the day. Jesus is won over by her reply. For such a statement, he says, "You may go, the demon has left your daughter." He doesn't travel to her home. He doesn't see the girl. He simply declares it done. The woman goes home and finds her daughter lying peacefully in bed, the demon gone. His word of command is sufficient, transcending all physical and cultural boundaries. Perhaps the most poignant of the other exorcism accounts is the healing of the boy with a mute and deaf spirit, which takes place immediately after the transfiguration. The narrative sets up a stark contrast between the heavenly glory Jesus experienced with Peter, James, and John on the mountaintop, and the grim, demonic suffering they encounter in the valley below. A father has brought his son to the remaining disciples, but they have failed to cast out the spirit. Their failure highlights both the ferocity of this particular demon and the weakness of their own faith. The father's description of his son's torment is harrowing, with symptoms that are graphically epileptic-like. The spirit seizes him, throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. It often tries to destroy him by throwing him into fire or water. When Jesus arrives, the Father pours out his story, ending with a desperate plea that has become a classic cry of faith for all time. I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Jesus, seeing the crowd running to the scene, rebukes the spirit with a command that is both an exorcism and a restraining order. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit's final act is one of violent defiance. It shrieks, convulses the boy so violently that he is left looking like a corpse, and then comes out. The crowd murmurs, he's dead. But Jesus takes the boy by the hand and lifts him up, an image of resurrection, restoring him to his Father. Later, when the disciples ask in private why they failed, Jesus tells them, this kind can come out only by prayer. The story serves as a powerful lesson on the reality of spiritual opposition and the necessity of complete reliance on God. When we synthesize these stories, a clear and consistent theological portrait emerges. The Gospels portray Jesus' ministry as an invasion, a divine rescue mission into a world that is held in bondage. The exorcisms are not just quirky anecdotes about ancient superstitions. They are frontline reports from a cosmic war. Jesus is reclaiming territory, liberating captives, and demonstrating that the kingdom of God has come with a power greater than that of the forces of darkness. His authority over these spirits is presented as absolute. They always know who he is, they always fear him, and they have no choice but to obey his command. He never struggles, he never fails. His word is his only weapon. The ultimate goal of every one of these terrifying encounters is the beautiful and quiet restoration of a human being. The wild man of the tombs is found sitting, dressed, and in his right mind. The convulsing boy is lifted up and given back to his Father. The demon's shrieking voice is muzzled so that the true person can emerge from the chaos. Jesus is liberating people from the forces that seek to alienate, dehumanize, and destroy them, restoring them to sanity, to community, and to themselves. And so our journey through these miraculous healings concludes. We have stood with the outcast leper as a compassionate touch restored him to society. We have been with the blind man as mud and spittle opened his eyes, not just to the physical world, but to the light of the world. We have watched through a hole in a roof as a paralyzed man was commanded not only to walk, but to walk away with his sins forgiven. We have marveled with a Roman centurion at an authority that heals from miles away. We have stood at the mouth of a tomb and heard a command that summoned a 4 days dead man back to life. And finally, we have entered the darkness of a tormented mind and witnessed a power that casts out legions and restores a shattered soul to peace. The healings of Jesus, in their totality, defy explanation, not simply because they are medically inexplicable, but because they are presented as something far more than cures for diseases. They are signs of a new creation. They are systematic acts of liberation, the strategic invasion of the kingdom of God into every realm of human brokenness. The gospel writers paint a portrait of a Redeemer who comes to conquer every enemy that holds humanity captive, from sickness and shame to sin and demonic oppression, and even to death itself. The ultimate claim is not just that he was a great healer, but that he was, and is, the great liberator, come to restore the world to wholeness in body, mind, spirit, and community.